Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about stress and kind of how you can manage it, some techniques that you can use to reduce your stress, and what your stress actually means. So we're going to talk a little bit about some elements from neuroscience to understand how the brain actually makes stress, like actually what is stress according to our brains. What we can do to kind of manage it and how emotions are created. So most of us feel like emotions just kind of crop up out of nowhere. They kind of have a mind of their own. They need controlling, things like that, right? So we actually know that emotions are created by the brain, and they're kind of evaluation of what is happening to you in your world. So say, you're walking along the street and someone jumps out on you, your brain creates fear so that you can act in an appropriate manner to be safe, right? So the brain links your past experiences to what is going on around you and makes meaning out of that, if that makes sense. And emotions are not reactions to situations, they are your brain's interpretation of what that situation means. Okay? So this is actually really important. This means that your thoughts, what you're thinking about the situation, is information that you're giving your brain to make that emotion. Okay? So we're going to circle back to that in a little bit because that's going to be important. So we know that emotional granularity is actually really important. So this is like a fancy way of saying how good are you at distinguishing different emotions from each other. So some people, I'm sure you know, like they have like three emotions. They're like sad, happy, and angry, and like that's all they know. And then some people, they have these like super like intricate emotions. They can talk about their emotions in a very specific way. So we actually know that talking about emotions, or at least interpreting emotions in our own brain in a specific way, is it's a good thing. It promotes health. It increases resilience. It actually makes people heal faster. So working with a coach can actually help you expand the ability to be more granular with your emotions, to identify your emotions at a more specific level, which actually makes you more resilient. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the core purpose of your brain. And so comment below if you actually know what the purpose of your brain is. Did you guys do it? Okay, so the purpose of your brain is actually to regulate the systems of your body. So your brain's whole point is to kind of make sure your body is working well and that you're safe and functioning to your optimal level. So we actually have really metabolically frugal brains. It's a tongue twister, which means that our brain is like kind of like, think of like an accountant, right? They're budgeting certain resources for your body. So, some glucose goes there, some oxygen goes there, and they want to make sure that this budget adds up and we don't go into a deficit. And so, because that would be bad for our bodies and it could actually be harmful to our survival. So if you think of your brain as like this little accountant sitting up there, just budgeting everything, you then start to think about what are the things that are costly to your brain, right? Because your budget is not, you don't have like an infinite budget. You have a certain budget, everyone gets one for their brain and their body. So if we think about things that are costly for our bodies, we think about movement is costly, and also learning something new is costly. So what happens when we get like super stressed out, we haven't been sleeping, we haven't been eating well, exercising, etc. We know that learning actually becomes more difficult for us. So we just don't have the budget for learning, and we just like are completely depleted in that amount. And if we try to go and learn something new and we're depleted, it doesn't happen, and you can't really force it. So that's really good to know if you are trying to learn, if you're trying to grow, to that it's actually really important to take care of yourself, and you just don't get that learning for nothing. So if you're anxious, this is actually a sign of something going on with your brain on a metabolic level. Again, we go back to the metaphor of the budgeter. So when we're anxious, we are maybe we're thinking about like a social evaluation, you know, at a party. That's kind of a social evaluation context. We think like, oh, these people are going to judge me, etc. Or maybe you feel like you don't have enough self-efficacy in your life, which means, you know, you don't feel like you have enough control over the things that are happening to you. You feel like you can't really achieve your goals. So these evaluations will stop your brain from spending because your brain is worried that you don't have enough resources. So when we actually get to that point where your brain isn't spending, that's actually depression. So your brain will just kind of like push everything down, stop spending, and kind of go into a very low energy state. And that can be one cause of depression. Like we were talking about before, the anxiety is your brain is just trying to be super alert to all of the signals that you're giving it. So like we were talking about the party example, is that if you feel like there's a lot of social evaluation that's going to happen, your brain gets really amped up and starts to tell your body, you know, like we need to be jittery, we need to be super alert, because we think that maybe something bad is going to happen, and we're super budgeting for that to protect ourselves. So people are walking around with really unbalanced budgets in their brains. And you can kind of think of this as, we know that in the US, our savings rate isn't quite as high as other developed countries. So maybe think of it like that. It's that we just haven't invested enough into that kind of reserve to be functioning at a healthy level. One of the important things is to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves physically. Sleeping, eating, exercising, all of us kind of know all of these basics, but I think a lot of us don't know what an impact they have on learning and the brain. So I think some people are just like, oh, I don't really need to exercise, like I don't really care about being fit or, you know, looking a certain way. But I think most people do care about, you know, being stressed and feeling depressed and being able to learn. Those are really important things. And if you're not taking care of your body, your brain is not able to budget for those activities. In addition, I want to talk about kind of our evaluations of scenarios. So we know that a lot of times certain emotions can feel very similar in the body. And it's only our interpretation of the emotion that actually gives our brains the information of how we should act and how we should react. So for example, think of a scenario in which maybe you were given an award and you need to make a speech to accept this award, right? So a lot of people might have the experience of being anxious before the speech. But if you were also, if you spent a little bit of time thinking about this and kind of reframed it, you could also consider the fact that this anxiousness actually feels very similar to being excited. So we know that anticipation and excitement, they're very similar. The anticipation can be negative or positive. Excitement is always positive, right? And they feel very similarly in our body. And what happens is that the thoughts we're thinking are the signals to our brain on whether this is a positive event or a negative event, right? So if you keep thinking like, oh my gosh, this speech, like I'm so nervous, I'm gonna mess up, it's gonna be the worst, then your brain's like, oh, okay, warning, negative event, like let's start budgeting for that. But if you're thinking before your speech, like, oh my gosh, like I'm so excited, you know, it's a big crowd, but I feel so honored that I was given this award, your brain starts thinking like, oh, this is a positive event. Let's start, you know, amping up our budget for that. So this work is from a neuroscientist called Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she has a book on this topic and a ton of studies. I will link them below. But one of her metaphors that I think work really well is she thinks of this as like a chef and a recipe. So all of the emotions that we feel have a certain amount of ingredients that we can put in for a certain outcome. And as we kind of work on this process, we become better chefs and we know what is the recipe for me feeling good. and we can kind of work in the ingredients for that. As with recipes, we can alter them and kind of change the ingredients a little bit. So what I think is really important here is the reframing of thoughts and situations. So it's really crucial to remember that any type of thought is information for our brain. All right, I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you guys next week with another video.